The Porsche 911 comes in many flavours. So many flavours, in fact, that even two-wheel drive 911s with coupe bodies and manual transmissions are available in many different guises. Here we have three of those: the 911 GT3 Touring, the 911 Carrera GTS, and the 911 T. But which one is the mint chopped chip with sauce and sprinkles on top, and which one is plain old vanilla? The 503 brake horsepower GT3 Touring is the most powerful and most expensive of the bunch at £146,400. But that's if you can get an allocation, otherwise you'll be spending more than 200 grand for a nearly new car.
We'll start in the GT3 Touring because it is the benchmark for the other two. It does set the standard. This is a very, very interesting car. Where to begin? How about the engine? It's one of the great engines, this one. It is magnificent. It sounds fantastic. I hope that sound is coming through, because in the cabin, it's just superb. You look at this engine, it goes to 9. It's not that big, 4 litres. You think it's going to be peaky, you think it's going to be really highly strung, like you're going to have to work it so hard. But actually, the torque is just astounding. As long as you've got 4,000 RPM or something, it just goes, it pulls so hard. Through the mid-range, even in a higher gear, it just pulls. So the car always feels really quick. And then you get through to 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 RPM, up to 9,000 RPM, and it just lights up. Yeah, the fireworks at the top end are just spectacular. I love it. It's one of the great engines, married to one of the great manual gear shifts. Just fantastic. 6-speed, really, really tightly defined gate, short throw, brilliant, lovely gear shift. And the way it's matched to the weighting of the clutch pedal, you can shift quickly, you can shift smoothly. And then we come on to the chassis. And that's where things get quite interesting, because this is a surprisingly stiffly sprung car. When you start driving this car through town at low speed or on a very bumpy road, you immediately think, this thing's too stiff, I can't put up with this. And if you were to use one of these every single day, I think that ride, that harshness, how tough the ride is, I think that would get to you. But when you get it onto a smooth section, wow, the chassis comes alive, and then this car is so exciting to drive. It's got that double wishbone front suspension layout, of course, and you feel it, you really feel it when you tuck it into a corner. Then it is just tremendous. It's so good. The steering itself is fantastic. There's bundles and bundles of grip. Yeah. In the right conditions, on the right road, and with that engine doing its thing, it's a phenomenal car, this GT3 Touring, until the front axle finds a rut or a groove in the road and then tries to drag you across it and over those bumps when you get rattled to pieces. And that's when you're reminded again that actually this is a stiffly sprung car, and on balance, for me, I think it is too stiff.
One down from the GT3 Touring in the 911 model range is this, the Carrera GTS. It's not quite as powerful, but 473 brake horsepower should still be plenty. It costs £122,000.
So how much fun and excitement are you giving up by choosing a GTS over the GT3? Well, a bit. Certainly, you don't have the soundtrack for one thing. This has got a twin turbo engine rather than a high revving naturally aspirated one, so it's not going to sound as good, and it doesn't. Although it's not bad, you don't have the same savage power delivery right at the top end as the GT3, of course you don't. Nor do you have that double wishbone front end, so this GTS doesn't dive into a corner quite like the GT3. It doesn't have the same outright grip either, and nor is the body control, particularly at speed, particularly when the road does a lot of that. The body control isn't quite there. So yeah, in some quite important ways, there is a lot of ground between the GT3 and the GTS. But am I enjoying myself less in the Carrera GTS? Really? Am I? Not really, I don't think I am. If I am having less fun, it's a fractional amount, because actually I prefer how supple this GTS feels over a bumpy road. That GT3 really is stiff, and is still sensationally quick, this GTS. It doesn't have much less power, but of course it's got way more torque, and so certainly through the mid-range it feels just as strong. I have to say, I still think this one sounds pretty good despite the twin turbos. It goes like stink. It's got a fantastic gear shift. It's not quite as sweet, not quite as direct as the GT3's, this 7-speed gearbox, but it's still pretty bloody good, I have to say. I think this is a phenomenal car, and of course you can have rear seats. It's more usable every day. It's not so demanding. On a really bumpy B road, it does work better. Okay, so it doesn't have the outright grip. It doesn't have quite the same accuracy, quite the same detail and feedback in the steering. So when you really start scrutinizing it, you can find ways in which this Carrera GTS falls behind the GT3. But I think on a fantastic mountain road, on a beautiful day in Wales, I think you're basically having as much fun.
The Carrera T is the cheapest of the three at £105,700. It's also the least powerful by a big margin with 380 brake horsepower, but in some ways it's a bit like a baby GT3 Touring. Less weight, more focus, firmer suspension, more rarity.
Well, that's the theory, but in practice, does the Carrera T get anywhere close to delivering a driving experience to match the GT3, or the GTS for that matter? I've really been looking forward to driving this Carrera T. I've driven the other two cars before, but not this one. It is the newest of the three, and in many ways it's the most interesting. It's the most affordable, it's the simplest. It has a lot going for it, this Carrera T, and let me tell you, it is magnificent to drive. I've loved driving this car today, even in the company of the GT3 and the GTS. It immediately feels the most supple in terms of ride quality. It glides over the road, it smothers the road, it doesn't beat you to pieces. And it means that on really poor road surfaces, and Lord knows we've got a lot of those, it's still fun to drive. Imagine that. It's way down on power compared to the other two. But at no point today, even after driving the GT3, have I stepped in this thing and thought, it's just not quick enough though, is it? Honestly, it feels rapid. It's got loads of torque, so it hauls through the mid-range because of those turbos, but then it keeps going at the top end as well, 7,500 RPM, sounds fantastic. There's loads of energy in the engine right at the top there. Oh, it's plenty quick enough. I've not missed the power one bit in this Carrera T. Really good engine, plenty of performance, a fantastic manual gear shift. So the drivetrain I really like, but it's the chassis that I love about this car, because it is more supple, because it doesn't beat you up. If there's a toughness about that GTS and the GT3 as well, I suppose, there is a delicacy about this Carrera T. It's so sweet. It feels really light. Even over a bumpy road, it's serene and smooth, but still the body control is there. Still, it's got tremendous grip. And when you tackle a few tighter corners, you can really shove it into a bend and commit to a bend with confidence. The other great thing about this Carrera T is that you do not need to be driving at 10 tenths, absolutely flat out, committed everywhere, for it to be fun. It's enjoyable all the time. It's comfortable and refined and civilized. You could use this thing every day, have rear seats in it, so it's even fairly practical. Honestly, this is what I want a 911 to be. This might just be the Goldilocks 911. All I can tell you is, in the company of two much more expensive, much faster, much more powerful 911s, I love this one. Now, before we go and have one final chat about these three 911s and work out which one is actually the best, let's see if we can learn something about these cars. Now, we've been working with JBR Capital for a while now, and any time I want to know a bit about a particular car, or the market, I talked to our car finance partner, JBR Capital, because their insights are just fantastic. So I asked them to tell me something I didn't know about these three cars. This is what they came back with.
No surprises here, but JBR Capital helps finance more Porsches than any other marque, while the 911 is the most financed model, full stop. Almost 12% of all JBR Capital's finance agreements are for 911s. The average sale price on those is £112,000. 911s are especially popular among 35 to 49-year-olds. It seems sports and supercar buyers still love the 911. One benefit of financing your next car with JBR Capital is that it will be the company, not you personally, that will be buying the car from the dealer. Therefore, if there's an issue with the car, JBR Capital will step in on your behalf to help resolve the issue. So you'll have an extra layer of protection should anything go wrong. Click the link on the screen now to see what JBR Capital can do for you on the finance side before you buy your next car. JBR Capital is authorised and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority.
We've run them all out of fuel, they're totally dry, but that does mean we can pull over and have a conversation about the three cars. Andrew?
Been an interesting day, isn't it?
So why gather these three 911s together?
I guess they're because they are the, for want of a less poncy phrase, the connoisseur's choice of kind of everyday 911s. So these aren't GT3Ss or Dakars or Sport Classics. These are kind of like normal 911s, but they've all got manual gearboxes. They're all rear-wheel drive. Actually, none of them have even got any rear seats in them.
No.
They're the sort of sporting driver's choice among the sporting driver's cars that 911s are anyway.
So we've counted them up, haven't we? And currently we think Porsche will sell you 6 911 coupes with two-wheel drive and a manual gearbox.
Yeah.
These are just 3 of them.
Yeah, that's a pretty rare combination these days, isn't it? But
is.
There are 6 of them available just in the 911.
In the 911 lineup. It's extraordinary. Yeah. So, what have we learnt today then? What did we come here thinking we'd find out? What has surprised you? Let's start with the GT3. Do we need to talk about the ride quality in this car?
Yeah, of course we do. We absolutely do, because to me, particularly someone who's been brought up on previous generations of GT3, it's not good enough. It's not, as an everyday drive, because you look at this car is so stealth, it's so under the radar, isn't it? And it's Gentian blue plate with it, blue paint with its silver wheels, and it hasn't got any wings or anything. It's a touring specification. It's lovely to look at, and you just think that would be a perfect daily driver. But for me, it's just a little bit too firm.
So for me, the pity with the GT3 Touring is that Touring seems only to mean it doesn't have a wing on the back. It doesn't mean that it's a better touring car.
And I don't know why they didn't just soften it off a little bit to make it more relevant to the badge on the back.
So is it just ride comfort in normal use, or do you think when you're going for a spirited drive on a great road, it's compromised there as well?
No, not really. I think the thing about this car is, I mean, even compared to the other two, and that is actually what, to me, what you're paying for that unbelievable naturally aspirated 4-litre engine, but also it is just locked down in the way the other two aren't. It's just nailed to the road.
There are sections along this road that are quite bumpy, and it rattles me on those. It gets a bit too busy for me. And on a poor B road, I'd be backing off, whereas in the others, I'd be clipping along.
The others do definitely have more compliancy, and that's, you know, you can't just ignore that, can you?
So let's talk about the GTS. There's something of the hot rod about the GTS.
For almost all people, almost all of the time, in a straight line, the GTS is faster than the GT3 because it's got like 20 fewer horsepower, something like that. But it's got so much more torque, low down, that actually, most of the time, you're not using 7, 8, 9,000 revs in the GT3, whereas you are using all the torque the GTS has all the time.
Yeah.
And it's got like 100 horsepower more than the T. And you really, really feel it, don't you?
Yeah, it goes like stink. It's the heaviest car here, even though it has got the lightweight pack. I think you feel that weight?
A little bit. I think it's as much a factor of the fact that you're just going that much faster because you've got that much more power under your foot. And so the engine is giving this car, the GTS, so much more work to do. Actually, than either the T or the GT3, because the GT3's got the chassis to cope with it, and the T hasn't got that much power to really, really test the chassis to those limits. I mean, I said to you earlier, didn't I, the GTS is the most over-engined car here. And that's how it feels. And you might like that. You might think, oh, well, that's quite good fun because you don't want a car to feel underpowered. I just wonder whether it might not be just a little bit too much the other side.
Interesting. The new boy then, Carrera T, actually the reason that we're here. I hadn't driven this one before. You drove it in LA?
Yeah.
I think it's magnificent. I've adored driving this thing today. Let me try and break that down a little bit. I like that it's more supple, particularly than the GT3. So it glides, it's more serene over these roads, over the bumps on these roads. It feels lighter, it feels supple and delicate. There's a delicacy about it that I love. Yeah. And I think maybe there's more to enjoy when you're just driving at normal speeds.
So I drove it over here. Not once did I ever feel, I wish I had another 100 horsepower. But even then, I feared that once we had these other two here, it might be a case of, well, that's very, very nice, but okay, just step aside. Let's let the senior citizen. And it didn't happen. It never felt second best. It never felt like it was struggling to keep up. No. It was, it's the cheapest car here by a considerable margin, and it rides better than the GT3. I think its power to chassis balance is better than the GTS's. It's a very hard car to fault, isn't it?
And like the GTS, you can walk into an OPC and buy one at list. And that's a big deal. We do have to address that, because with the GT3, as you know, you can't necessarily do that. Not everybody can. So this one, the yellow one, for me, has a huge amount going in its favour. So that's me. I genuinely would choose to go home in the Carrera T. Now, clearly there's a fuller verdict to be written. That will be his job. In fact, by the time this video goes out, the story will be live on the Intercooler. There'll be a link here somewhere to go and read the story, look at Mark Riccioni's beautiful photography. So you sure I can't take the yellow one?
Absolutely, sir. Thanks.